They say a man is never too poor to give and never too rich to learn. That morning, Johnny Cash was walking the edge of his land in rural Arkansas, where the soil was dark and heavy and the air still carried the cool breath of dawn. The cotton fields stretched quietly under the pale sun, rows lined like memories waiting to be harvested. Johnny moved slowly, hands in his pockets, boots sinking slightly into the soft earth. The land was calm, too calm. The kind of silence that lets you hear your own thoughts. That's when he noticed movement. Near the far edge of the field, where the fence met a line of old trees, a figure was bent low between the rows. Not a farmhand. Johnny knew his people. He knew their silhouettes, their habits, the way they carried themselves. This figure moved differently, carefully, hesitantly. Johnny stopped. He didn't shout, didn't call anyone. He watched. An elderly woman, thin and unsteady, was pulling ears of corn from the stalks and slipping them into a worn cloth sack. Her hands trembled. Her back was curved by years of labor and time. Every movement carried the weight of effort and urgency. Johnny felt no anger, only something heavier. He took a few steps forward, slow enough not to startle her. When he finally spoke, his voice was low, steady, carrying no threat. "Mom, what are you doing?" The woman froze. The sack slipped from her hands and hit the ground. She turned, eyes wide, fear flashing across her face. She pulled her shawl tighter around her shoulders, as if trying to disappear inside it. "I'm sorry," she whispered. "I didn't mean no harm, I swear." Johnny raised a hand, palm open. "I'm not here to hurt you," he said. "I just want to understand." The woman's lips trembled. Tears welled up, spilling down lines carved by years of quiet hardship. "My grandson is hungry," she said. "His mama left months ago. Ain't sent nothing back. I had nothing left to give him. I thought you wouldn't miss a few ears of corn." Johnny didn't answer right away. The wind moved gently through the field. Somewhere, a bird took flight. And in that silence, Johnny Cash remembered being a boy with an empty stomach and a mother who stretched meals and hope as far as they could go. Johnny listened without interrupting. The woman wiped her eyes with the edge of her shawl, ashamed and exhausted. Her voice was thin, but steady enough to carry truth. "My name's Martha," she said softly. "I live up by the old creek, past the dry bridge. Just me and the boy." Johnny nodded, eyes still on her, not on the sack of corn at her feet. "How old is he?" Johnny asked. 8, she replied. "His name's Eli. He tries to be brave, tries not to ask, but hunger don't listen to pride." That sentence stayed in the air longer than it should have. Johnny bent down and picked up the sack, feeling its weight. Light, too light to be theft, heavy enough to be survival. He handed it back to her. "No one steals food here," he said calmly. "Not from me." Martha looked up, confused. "But I didn't ask." Johnny shook his head gently. "Sometimes asking feels harder than stealing," he said. "I know that." He turned and whistled once. A farmhand farther down the field looked up. "Bring a truck," Johnny called out, "and tell the house to fix some food." Martha gasped, shaking her head. "No, sir, I don't want trouble. I don't want charity." Johnny met her eyes. "This isn't charity," he said. "This is making things right." She hesitated. "My grandson, he don't walk right," she added quietly, like a confession she'd carried too long. "Doctor said he needed special shoes. We never had the money." Johnny felt something tighten in his chest. A boy who couldn't run. A grandmother carrying more than her years allowed. A land that gave, but had been allowed to ignore. Johnny looked across the fields, his fields, and for the first time that morning, they felt different. Not peaceful, responsible. "Come back tomorrow morning," Johnny said. "Bring the boy." Martha stared at him, unsure if she'd heard correctly. "I want to meet him," Johnny added, "and we'll talk about what comes next." Tears fell freely now. She reached for his hand, but he gently stopped her. "No kneeling, no thanking," he said. "Just come." As she walked away with the sack of corn, her steps lighter than before, Johnny stayed where he was. The sun had risen fully now, washing the land in gold. Something had already changed, and Johnny knew it wasn't just for her. The next morning arrived clear and quiet. Johnny Cash was already awake before sunrise, sitting on the wooden steps of the farmhouse with a cup of black coffee cooling in his hands. The air smelled of damp soil and pine. Somewhere in the distance, a rooster announced the day like it always had, long before music or fame ever found him. He had told the house staff to leave the front gate open. No questions, no looks, just open. Around mid-morning he saw them. Martha came walking slowly up the dirt road, holding a small boy's hand. The child limped slightly, careful with each step, as if the ground itself might betray him. His shoes were worn thin, one heel uneven, his balance uncertain, but his posture proud. Johnny stood up and walked toward them. "Morning," he said softly. Martha nodded. "Morning, sir. We came like you said." The boy looked up at Johnny, eyes sharp and curious. "I'm Eli," he said before his grandmother could speak. "I can help if you need help." Johnny smiled, not wide, not for show, but real. "I believe you," Johnny replied, "but today you're just here to eat." They sat at the long kitchen table. Biscuits, eggs, beans, milk still cold from the cellar. Eli ate quietly at first, then faster, like someone afraid the food might disappear if he didn't move quickly enough. Johnny watched without comment. After breakfast, Johnny crouched down in front of the boy, bringing himself eye level. "Does your foot hurt?" he asked. Eli shrugged. "Sometimes, mostly when I walk too long. I used to run. Don't much anymore." Johnny nodded, absorbing every word. "Would you like to see the horses?" he asked. Eli's eyes widened. "Really, really." Outside, the stable doors were open. The smell of hay and leather filled the air. A tall, calm horse lifted its head as they approached, ears forward, curious. "That one's named Midnight," Johnny said. "He was skittish when I got him. Took a while before he trusted anyone." Eli reached out slowly, hesitating. Midnight didn't move. "He trusts you," Johnny said. "Animals know." Martha watched from a distance, hands clasped, tears silently forming. She hadn't seen her grandson smile like that in a long time. Johnny straightened up. "Who worked this land before?" he asked casually. Martha hesitated. "My daughter's husband," she said. "Eli's father. He worked here, lost the job. After that, everything fell apart." Johnny turned toward the barns, eyes narrowing just slightly. "Who let him go?" he asked. Martha swallowed. "I don't know if I should say." Johnny's voice stayed calm. "If something's wrong," he said, "it doesn't get better by staying quiet." She took a breath. "The foreman," she said, "Mr. Lawson." Johnny didn't react, but something behind his eyes shifted. Because Johnny Cash knew one thing for certain. Hunger rarely begins in the fields. It begins with power used the wrong way. Johnny didn't ask anything more right then. He walked Martha and Eli back toward the house, made sure they had food packed to take home, and told them to come back the next day. His voice was steady, but his thoughts weren't. When they left, Johnny stood alone by the barn, listening to the low sounds of the animals and the creak of old wood. Something felt wrong. Not loud, not obvious, but wrong. Later that afternoon, Johnny called for the foreman. Mr. Lawson arrived just before sunset, boots clean, posture straight, hat pulled low. He carried himself like a man used to being obeyed. "You wanted to see me?" Lawson asked. Johnny nodded toward a crate and sat down. "I heard you let a man go last year," Johnny said. "A good worker. Name was Thomas Reed." Lawson didn't hesitate. "He caused trouble," he said. "Questioned supplies, complained too much." Johnny's eyes stayed on him. "About what?" "Food quality, missing stock. Said things weren't adding up." Johnny leaned back slowly. "And you fired him for that?" Lawson shrugged. Didn't have a choice. Can't have men stirring others up. The words hung heavy. Johnny stood up. There's a difference between stirring trouble, he said quietly, and calling out a wrong. Lawson stiffened. I've kept this place running while you were gone half the year, he said. Some people don't understand how things work. Johnny stepped closer, close enough that Lawson had to look him in the eye. I understand exactly how things should work, Johnny said. And if someone is being hurt under my name, I want to know. Lawson's jaw tightened. You trusting the word of a woman who steals corn now? That did it. Johnny's voice didn't rise, but it hardened. She didn't steal, he said. She survived. Lawson looked away. Johnny pointed toward the storage sheds. Tomorrow morning, he said, I want inventory. Every bag, every receipt. Lawson hesitated. That's not necessary. Johnny met his gaze. It is now. That night, Johnny couldn't sleep. He sat at the kitchen table long after the house went quiet, hands wrapped around a mug gone cold, thinking about Eli's limp, about the silence of good men pushed out, about land that should have fed, but instead starved. And deep down, Johnny knew, if someone had been stealing, it wasn't the poor. The next morning, the air felt heavier. Johnny arrived at the storage sheds early, before most of the hands had finished their coffee. The doors were still locked. Mr. Lawson was late. Something that had never happened before. When he finally arrived, keys jingling a little too loudly, Johnny noticed the tension in his shoulders. Open it, Johnny said. Inside, rows of grain sacks were stacked high. Corn, feed. Supplies meant to last through lean months. At first glance, everything looked right. Too right. Johnny walked slowly between the stacks, running his hand over the coarse fabric. He knelt, checked labels, dates, markings. Nothing obvious. Then he turned to one of the younger workers. How much feed did we go through last winter? Johnny asked. The man hesitated. Less than usual, sir. Weather was mild. Johnny nodded. And how much did the book say we used? The answer didn't match. Johnny straightened up. Bring me the ledger, he said. Lawson's face tightened. Those records are internal. Johnny didn't raise his voice. So is my name, he replied. The ledger was thick, dusty, meant to look untouched. Johnny flipped through it slowly. Numbers marched neatly down the pages. Too neatly, no mistakes, no hesitation, perfect bookkeeping, the kind that hides things. Then Johnny noticed something small, a repeated notation. Same handwriting, same initials, over and over again. He closed the book. Who authorizes secondary transfers? Johnny asked. Lawson swallowed. Sometimes arrangements are necessary. Arrangements with who? Silence. Johnny stepped closer. I grew up poor, he said quietly. I know hunger. I also know greed, and they don't sound the same. Lawson finally spoke. Suppliers, middlemen, people who help keep things running. Johnny's eyes darkened. And the families up the creek? He asked. Who helps them? Lawson looked away. Johnny handed the ledger to another worker. I want this checked, every page, he said. And I want names. Lawson's voice sharpened. You're going to tear this place apart over a few complaints? Johnny met his gaze. If it needs tearing apart to stop hurting people, he said, then yes. Outside, clouds began to gather. The wind shifted, carrying the smell of rain. Johnny Cash stood there knowing one thing for sure. Whatever had been buried in silence was about to surface. And when it did, someone was going to answer for it. By noon, the rain still hadn't fallen, but everyone felt it coming. Johnny sat at the long table in the office while two trusted hands went through the records page by page. The room was quiet, except for the scrape of paper and the ticking of an old wall clock. Then one of them stopped. This one doesn't belong, the man said, tapping the page. Johnny leaned in. There it was again, the same initials, the same routing number, and beside it, a name written lightly, as if it wasn't meant to be noticed. Caleb Morris. Johnny recognized it immediately. Morris wasn't one of his men. He wasn't local labor. He was a supplier, a middleman who dealt in feed, livestock transport, and emergency loans for rural families when crops failed. A man who profited when people were desperate. Johnny closed the ledger slowly. "So the corn goes missing," he said, thinking aloud. "The feed gets watered down. A worker complains and gets fired, and the debt lands on families who can't pay." No one spoke. Outside, thunder rolled low and distant. Johnny stood up. "I want Morris here," he said. "Today." One of the workers hesitated. "He won't come easy." Johnny picked up his jacket. "Then I'll go to him." He stopped at the door and turned back. "And bring Mrs. Martha and the boy tomorrow," he added. "I want them here when this gets said out loud." That afternoon, Johnny drove into town himself. The building was modest, Morris's name painted neatly on the glass. Inside, the air smelled of stale coffee and ink. Caleb Morris looked up, startled. "Johnny Cash," he said quickly, standing. "Didn't expect—" "You didn't," Johnny replied calmly. "But I'm here." Johnny placed the ledger on the desk and opened it to the marked page. "These transfers," he said. "You want to explain them?" Morris's smile faded. "Just business," he said. "Nothing illegal." Johnny leaned forward. "When business feeds on hunger," he said, "it stops being business." Morris shifted in his chair. "You think those people would survive without my credit?" Johnny's eyes hardened. "I think they'd survive just fine," he said, "if people like you stopped using them." The rain finally began to fall, hard against the windows. Johnny Cash stood up. "Tomorrow," he said, "you'll come to my land. You'll bring every contract you've made connected to my property. And if I don't—" Johnny paused at the door. "Then you'll explain it to someone else," he said, "and they won't be as patient." As Johnny stepped back into the rain, he knew this was no longer just about stolen corn. It was about dignity, and dignity, once taken, demands to be returned in full. The next morning, the land felt different, not quieter, heavier. Pickup trucks lined the dirt road near the barn. Men stood in small clusters, hats in their hands. Women waited with children close to their sides. No one knew exactly what was about to happen, only that Johnny Cash had called them there himself. That alone meant something. Johnny arrived early and didn't go inside the house. He chose the open space beneath the old oak tree where everyone could see everyone else. No walls, no shadows. When Caleb Morris arrived, he wasn't smiling. He carried a briefcase, clean boots, pressed shirt, a man who believed paperwork could protect him. Johnny waited until everyone had gathered. Then he spoke. "I didn't call you here to accuse anyone," Johnny said, his voice steady but firm. "I called you here so no one has to whisper anymore." A murmur passed through the crowd. Johnny nodded toward Mrs. Martha, who stood near the front with her grandson gripping her skirt. "Martha," he said gently, "tell them why you were in my fields." Her hands shook, but she lifted her chin. "My daughter left to find work," she said. "She never sent money back. My grandson was hungry. I owed feed money I never borrowed. And every time I asked why, they told me it came from the ranch." She pointed slowly, not at Johnny, but at Morris. Silence fell like a held breath. Johnny turned to Morris. "Your turn." Morris opened his briefcase quickly. Papers came out. Receipts. Signatures. "Loans," he said. "Agreements. They signed." Johnny picked one up and read it aloud. "Interest at 40%, he said. "Payment in livestock. Failure results in seizure." He looked up. "You call that help?" Morris swallowed. "That's how the system works." Johnny shook his head. "No," he said. "That's how exploitation works." He gestured to the crowd. "Anyone else?" A man stepped forward, then another. Stories overlapped. Missing pay, false debts, animals taken, threats made in Johnny's name. Each word stripped the room bare. Johnny listened to everyone. When no one else spoke, he turned back to Morris. "You used my land, my workers, my name." Morris tried to interrupt. Johnny raised one hand. "And that ends today." He looked at the local magistrate standing nearby. "These records go with you," Johnny said. "Every page." Then he faced the crowd again. "Every debt tied to this ranch is cancelled," he said. "Effective now." Gasps, tears, disbelief. "And anyone who took from you," Johnny added, "will answer for it." The oak tree stood silent above them as the rain clouds finally broke open, and for the first time in a long while, the truth wasn't hiding anymore. The rain didn't stop the meeting. If anything, it sharpened it. Morris stood rigid as the magistrate collected the documents, his confidence draining with every page turned. Around him, the people didn't cheer, they didn't shout, they simply watched, the way people do when they've waited a long time to see something finally set right. Johnny stepped away from the table and walked toward Martha and her grandson. He crouched slowly so he was eye level with the boy. "What's your name, son?" Johnny asked. "Ethan," the boy whispered. Johnny nodded. "You like horses, Ethan?" The boy's eyes lit up just a little. "Yes, sir." "Then you're going to meet one today," Johnny said quietly. "A gentle one." He stood and turned back to the crowd. "Starting today," Johnny said, "this ranch changes how it operates." He pointed toward the barn. "No private loans, no middlemen, no debts disguised as favors." Then he looked directly at Morris. "And no one ever speaks for me again unless I give them permission." Morris opened his mouth to respond, but the magistrate raised a hand. "You'll explain everything at the county office," the man said flatly. "Now." Two deputies stepped forward. Morris hesitated, then closed his briefcase. As he walked away, the sound of rain on the dirt grew louder, almost cleansing. Johnny didn't watch him leave. Instead, he addressed the people again. "If you're hungry," he said, "you come here. If your animals are sick, you come here. If something doesn't feel right, you come here." He paused. "This land isn't meant to trap people. It's meant to feed them." Martha broke down then, covering her face. Johnny placed a hand on her shoulder, steady and sure. "You did nothing wrong," he said. Later that afternoon, Johnny personally walked Ethan to the stable. A white gelding lifted its head as they entered, calm and curious. "This is Grace," Johnny said. "She listens better than most people." Ethan reached out, hesitant at first, then smiling as the horse breathed softly into his palm. Behind them, the rain slowed. The fields drank it in, and word began to spread, not loudly, not dramatically, but the way real change always does, quietly, one family at a time. The reaction didn't take long. By the next morning, word had traveled beyond the fence lines of the ranch. Some people praised Johnny quietly, with nods and handshakes that said more than words ever could. Others weren't as kind. A local paper ran a short piece near the bottom of the page. "Cash intervenes in ranch dispute. Overstepping or compassion." A radio host joked that Johnny had gone soft. Another said a man with his money shouldn't be meddling in small people's problems. Johnny heard all of it. He didn't respond to any of it. That afternoon, a long-time acquaintance pulled him aside near the barn. "You know what they're saying," the man warned, "that you're setting a precedent, that now everyone's going to come asking for help." Johnny leaned against the wooden post, arms crossed, eyes on the horizon. "Good," he said. The man blinked. "Good?" Johnny nodded slowly. "If someone's desperate enough to ask," he replied, "then pretending not to see them costs more than helping ever will." Later that day, a letter arrived. No return address. Inside was a single sentence written in uneven handwriting. "Thank you for seeing us when no one else would." Johnny folded the note and slipped it into his jacket pocket without a word. That evening, He walked the perimeter of the ranch alone, boots crunching against wet gravel. The fields were greener already. The air smelled clean. He stopped near the fence where the corn had been taken, bent stalks, empty husks, proof of what had started everything. He didn't feel anger, he felt clarity. The next morning, something unexpected happened. People came, not to ask for money, but to offer help. A mechanic offered free repairs on old equipment. A veterinarian volunteered checkups for livestock in the hills. A school teacher asked if the ranch could help fund notebooks for children who shared pencils. Johnny listened. Then he did something no one anticipated. He said yes, but with one condition. "This isn't charity," he told them. "It's responsibility. We do this together." A small fund was created, transparent, accounted for, managed locally, no favors, no debts, no silence, just structure. Within weeks the tone shifted. Critics grew quieter, skeptics ran out of arguments, because the people who mattered weren't talking, they were standing taller. And one evening, as the sun dipped low, Johnny sat on the porch with a guitar resting unused across his knees. He didn't play. He just watched Ethan run across the yard, laughing, steady on his feet now, Grace following him like a shadow. Martha stood nearby, hands folded, eyes shining. Johnny exhaled slowly. Some songs are never written, some justice is never recorded. But that doesn't mean it doesn't echo. Years later, people would tell the story differently. Some said Johnny Cash had caught a thief and shown mercy. Others claimed it was a staged act of generosity. A few insisted it never happened at all. Johnny never corrected any of them. There was no interview, no press release, no benefit concert tied to the moment. Because the truth didn't belong to the headlines. It lived in smaller places. In the way Martha no longer walked with her eyes lowered. In the way Ethan ran without stumbling, his laughter louder than the wind. In the way neighbors began helping one another without waiting to be asked. The ranch changed, not in size or profit, but in spirit. People spoke more freely. Problems were brought forward instead of buried. Fear loosened its grip. One evening, long after the dust had settled, Johnny sat alone with his guitar as the sun disappeared behind the fields. He played softly, not for an audience, not for applause, not even for himself. He played because music, like kindness, doesn't need permission to exist. A ranch hand once asked him later, half joking, "Boss, what made you step in that day?" Johnny didn't answer right away. He tuned a string, looked out across the land, then finally said, "Because I've been hungry before, and because nobody ever forgets the moment someone chooses not to look away." The cornfield grew back the next season, stronger, fuller. And the fence was repaired, not higher, not harsher, just enough to mark the land without closing it off from the people who depended on it. Johnny Cash never wrote a song about that morning. But if you listen closely to the ones he did write, about mercy, justice, dignity, and truth, you'll hear it there, because some of the loudest statements a man can make are the ones he makes quietly when no one is asking him to. And sometimes the difference between a thief and a neighbor is simply whether someone chooses to see the human first.